All right, so now we come to the main event of the program. We're going to be hearing from Jim Edgerly. As all of you know, Jim Edgerly was the senior pastor for the Boston Family Church for over 10 years. For the past year, he's been very involved in the Higher Purpose Forum, really trying to bring racial unity and harmony to this nation and to the world. So in the spirit of Children's Day, I really hope that we can have an open mind and listen to our brother so that we can make our parent God happy. All right, please put your hands together to welcome up Jim Edgerly.
Isn't it great to have an assistant pastor? Sun Hyung and I had a telephone call or a Zoom call a few days ago and thought it would go for 20 minutes or so when we ended up talking for what, an hour and a half?
2 hours and 15.
2 hours and 15 minutes. It's a great conversation. So I'm really happy to have Sun Hyung helping us. And also, as you're all aware, our pastor, I think you might have mentioned this, our pastor is very sick. She was bit by a tick, and it transferred, they think, both Lyme and I think it's called New England malaria. And she's really feeling poorly. She's on antibiotics, and she's going to the doctor again on Tuesday to get to recheck the diagnosis with CAT scans and MRIs and all this. So we really have to pray for our pastor. She's feeling poorly, and I know she wanted to be here, and she thought seriously about coming even though she felt poorly. But I spoke to her yesterday, and she just decided she can't really stand up right now because she gets dizzy when she stands up, yeah. So let's pray for our pastor. I'd like to begin today by apologizing. I prepared a sermon without a single scriptural reference. Nothing of Father's words, nothing from Jesus' words, nothing from the Bible. It's outrageous, I know. But I have an excuse. I spent about 3 days preparing a sermon. I worked on it tirelessly over a period of 3 days, and I prepared an entirely different sermon than the one I'm giving today. And I started having second thoughts about this sermon, so I called up Pastor Ono last night at 8 o'clock, and I told her what I was going to do, and she said, nope. So I had to start, and she was perfectly right. I got on the wrong track. So I had to start all over again at 8 o'clock last night. So in the old days, I could stay up all night writing a sermon, but I just cannot do that anymore. So I hope you'll forgive me. This is really bad form, but I just didn't have time to really put the scriptural, references that any good sermon requires in this sanctuary. To speak without referring to the words of true parents and the words of Jesus is actually really bad form. So I hope you'll forgive me.
We do. We forgive you.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. Okay. So, a very important event happened in our country on May 25th, 2020. Who knows what happened on May 25th, 2020?
George Floyd.
George Floyd was murdered in broad daylight by a policeman. I say murdered because the policeman was found guilty in a court of law. And a lot of people like to second guess the institutions of our country now, including the courts, and criticize. But the courts are our courts. And if you're an American and you trust your country, love your country, you respect the verdicts of the court. The court said George Floyd was murdered, and therefore I'm saying publicly he was murdered by a policeman. And that changed the discussion in this country on race relations, on civil rights. The conversation before that happened and after that happened are completely different from one another. We are now in the post-civil rights era of our country. Before George Floyd was murdered, the discussion was rooted in civil rights in words like discrimination and segregation, and the civil rights movement actually had its roots in the black church. That's the culture from which the civil rights movement emerged. It was a culture based upon the gospel. The post-George Floyd culture of discussion on civil rights is all about, it's been very, very heavily politicized, and it's coming from the far left, and it calls into question the very roots and the foundations and the purpose of our country. It was completely uncharacteristic of the prior era of civil rights in our country. So, for better or for worse, we are headed into some very new territory in our country. Something new is being asked. The future is not clear. And by the way, when I changed the title of the sermon, I changed the title of the sermon also. The title of this sermon is Crossing a New Threshold. The race relations issue has defined the culture, the political culture of our country. It defined what happened in the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia. It led to the largest war, our Civil War, and it's been a continuing central issue in our country for our entire history. And we're now entering a new phase of that history in our country. And we're now listening to 4 sets of perspectives on the race issue. There's 4 ideologies in the public square. White nationalism, what's called rugged individualism, which is a view of America and the world which gives rise to the ideas of conservatives. This is basically sort of anti-governmentalism. The third one is liberal governmentalism, which is what gave rise to the legislation that was passed recently by the U.S. Congress, called the big infrastructure bill, and the next one is Build Back Better. That's an expression of liberal governmentalism. The government is responsible to fix the problems of our country. That's very different than conservatism. It's very different from white nationalism. And it's very different from the fourth and the newest perspective on racism, which is critical race theory, which has an expression, its prescription is deconstruction, and it's articulated in the ideology of what people who refer to themselves as being woke. That's the fourth viewpoint on racism in our country. And after listening to all these perspectives for a while, I have a news condition. I watch 1 hour of news every day at least. And I also read at least one newspaper. And I realized after a while, I don't identify with any of these guys. None of these guys make sense to me. And I don't have a single news station anymore that I can listen to. Ever since, actually before the murder of George Floyd, I've been sort of feeling like a man without a country. I don't identify with anyone out there that's expressing their opinion in the public square about what's going on, their interpretation of what's going on and what we should do about it. I just don't agree. I don't agree with the liberals, I don't agree with the conservatives, I don't agree with the white nationalists, I don't agree with the woke. And it troubles me. I feel like a man without a country. But eventually I came to 2 conclusions. The first conclusion I came to is that, boy, there must be a lot of people who feel like me. And so I started talking to people. And I found out that that's exactly the case. Most people are on the sidelines saying, all this stuff, it just doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up. It's all partial. It's all narrow. It's all without love, without heart, without an appreciation for our country. There's something missing from each one of these prescriptions. The second thing that I realized was, of course I don't agree with them. I should be proud of myself for not agreeing with them. They're not expressing God's viewpoint. None of them are right. That's why I don't identify with them. So instead of second-guessing myself and feeling like I'm a man without a country, this is exactly what I went through when I joined the Unification Faith when I was a teenager. After a while, I said, wait a minute, all these people are wrong. The world's fallen. I don't buy into any of it. And that's really the way I feel when I watch the evening news. Right now, I go from station to station. Right now, I'm watching PBS, the PBS NewsHour with Judith Woodruff. I don't know what I'll try next, but I keep trying. But I mean, I listen, and you can definitely learn, because each one of these perspectives has an angle that's got its point. Each one of the criticisms has their truth to it. But none of them tell the whole story, and none of them really understand our country and God's viewpoint for our country. Well, I've heard it said 100 times in our movement that we have the divine principle and we have the true parents, so we can solve all the world's problems. Yet I notice issue after issue after issue, we are very reluctant to get involved. We got involved with communism. We did a great job. We were awesome. But there's so many other issues. The Father told us exactly what God's viewpoint was on it, or what the principal viewpoint was on it, and we just stayed on the sideline. Do you know that Father spoke like in every country around the United States against the Iraq War? Do you know that? You could read it in the peace. What was it called? What's that book called? Peace Messages. Yeah. But did we say anything in the public square? Nothing. Did that perspective prove to be correct? Absolutely, that proved to be correct. But Father, he was so upset about, that's just one issue. There's been many, many issues where the principal perspective is quite clear, but the unification movement does not articulate and take a stand and use it to educate anybody. The DB claims that the new truth will provide, this is what it says, I think it's in the introduction, rational, scientifically sound solutions to the world's problems in a way that sophisticated, rational, modern people will understand. That's our claim to the purpose of the new truth. Okay, let's have it. What is the principled headwing God viewpoint solution to this problem that is tearing this country apart for the last 400 years, actually? We have 400-year history of race relations in this country. Father has told us that this country has a problem with racism. Father said that. Father stood in Foley Square and he said, the reason I'm going to jail is because Americans are racist. He said that. Father said that. He said, if I was white and Presbyterian, I would not be here. So, we have a problem. Father told us we have a problem. So, this is the country where the problem of racism has to be sorted out. It came here. And I'll tell you more about it, maybe some other message, but why it's this country. North Korea, Koreans have the issue of a divided country. And our movement is on that issue, big time. We believe that the unificationists can solve, true parents can solve that issue. That's their issue, and the whole world wants to help because that's our fatherland. Our issue in the United States is race. That's our issue. That's the problem that we are called on by God to solve. And that's a problem that Father identified as being here. So we need to be the fifth voice in the public square. It should be white nationalists, conservatives, liberals, the woke, and the principal viewpoint. That's what it should be in this country. If we can't solve the problem of race, which is a universal problem, it's not just in the United States. The problem of race is a universal problem, but we are the ones to solve it. We're the ones with the responsibility. If we can't solve it here and then teach the rest of the world, there'll be no Chanilguk. Just like you said, you can't create a one-world family if the children don't get along, if the children don't know how to get along. That was a beautiful introduction. And believe me, if you ask the African American members of our faith if we've worked out the problems of racism in our movement, and if we've achieved true integration in our movement, if you ask an African American unificationist if we figured it out, they will 100% say no. I've seen racism in this movement. The reason I know that's for a fact is because I'm dealing with these brothers and sisters now, and that's what we hear. That's what we hear. These people were told, some of them were told once, don't witness to African American people. Can you believe it? I'm ashamed to say it. So, 2 years ago, we started Higher Purpose Forum, and we've been working on developing a headwing understanding on this race issue for the past year. And we have every intention of being the fifth voice on this issue in the public square. We have had 25 presentation and discussion meetings on Saturdays afternoons since last November for the past year. And we have pretty far along in writing a paper called New Possibilities. Right now it's about 50 pages. It's got 4 authors. Christine O'Connell is working on the paper with us. That's why she's here this morning. Thank you, Christine. It's not easy, right, Christine? But we're working away every day. We've learned that the underlying issue, yes, people have racist feelings, but that's not the underlying problem. The underlying problem is not skin color. And people who talk about everything in terms of race, white this, black that, white this, black that, they are not proposing a solution. They're just identifying a problem. They are furthering racial anxiety, racial division, trauma. They're not offering us the way out of this, or the way to turn this into goodness. They're using like a bludgeon to hit us over the head with their racial terminology. The underlying problem is tribalism. It's tribalism. The Oxford Dictionary defines tribalism as a derogatory term. Derogatory means a negative connotation. The Oxford Dictionary describes tribalism as a derogatory term for behavior and attitudes that stem from strong loyalty to one's own tribe or social group. The underlying problem in this country is tribalism, based on deeply, deeply rooted differences that do exist. There's real differences between our tribes. And anyone that says that they're colorblind, sorry, you're ignorant. You shouldn't be so judgmental, sorry, but you can't be colorblind. These differences are real and they're very important. They're important to God. The differences between tribes, between the Asian tribe and the African tribe and the European tribe are profound. They've existed for tens of thousands of years. They're not going away, and they're very important in God's providence. So let's not try to become colorblind. God can be colorblind with His love. But we, as members of a tribe, I'm from the European American tribe, I can't be colorblind. I can't succeed in my responsibilities if I pretend that I'm colorblind. These differences are in culture, spirituality, sensitivities, aesthetics, languages, traditions, They are much deeper and more profound than skin color. These tribal differences are rooted in tens of thousands of years of isolated development by each of these three great tribes. They developed independently from one another. The three great tribes are the Asian, yellow tribe, the African, black tribe, the European, white tribe. And for 99% of human history, they have developed and advanced in isolation of one another. And now we've been brought together here. That's what America is all about. This is where tribes reconverge in big numbers. And we know that tribes don't want to disassimilate. They want to remain exclusive. It's comfortable. This is because we're fallen. We have perspectives regarding those of other tribes as being superior, inferior, attractive, unattractive, advanced, backwards, win, lose. That's the way that people from one tribe, with their fallen heart and ungodly perspective, tend to perceive peoples of the other tribes. But is that God's perspective towards those people? That's the question we always have to ask. What's God's perspective? That is not God's perspective. God does not see tribes as being attractive, unattractive, superior, inferior, advanced, backwards. No. God loves all of his children, and God has a plan for total salvation. Everybody is part of God's family, and everybody is welcome in the Chanilguk. In our country, there are three what we can call original tribes, and they've been together now for 400 years. 400 years. This is not a new thing here. This has got 4 centuries of our relationship, our marriage together is 400 years old. We have the indigenous Americans. They're Asian. They came across the Bering Strait about 13,000 years ago. They came from Asia. The American indigenous Indians, those represent the Asian tribe. We have the European Americans, the whites who came here 400 years ago. That's me. We have African slave-descended Americans. Very specifically, the key tribe in this debate are these slave-descended Americans like Zagery, like Martin Luther King, like Reverend Darrell Clark. Barack Obama, very importantly, is not a slave-descended African American. He's an immigrant. That's a different culture. That's a different story. Those immigrants, we're so happy that they're here, but they are not part of that 400-year story. They're much more recent than that. In our unification community, we have local offshoots of these tribes. And we also, within our unification community, have to deal with the issue of the same issues of tribalism. We have not transcended tribalism. So why do we really need to go through this? Do we really have to overcome tribalism? I like my tribe. Leave me alone. I like hanging around with people who are like me. I'm no different. I'm like that. My neighborhood is almost all people just like me. But we really need to overcome tribalism for 3 reasons. Firstly, tribalism is causing immense suffering to God's children. That's what these protests in the streets are all about. The protests after George Floyd's murder were the most destructive period of civil unrest in the history of the United States. People were angry. Now, you can say a lot of stuff about it, how it was politicized or manipulated, but not when it happens to that level. That might explain what happened in Minneapolis. It might explain what happened in a few other cities, but you don't explain 2,000 protests. And those protests spread all over the world. You can't explain that just by some swift political manipulation. There's deep anger because of 400 years of this still not being resolved. If we have a heart for God and therefore a heart for His children, we cannot be indifferent to this suffering. And the second issue is that tribalism, remaining tribally isolated, limits our ability to resemble God. It really, really prevents us from becoming universal, as God is universal. God is a universal parent to all of us, and our responsibility, motivated by our love for God, is to overcome the consequences of the fall, to restore our original nature, and grow to resemble God and God's fullness. We see God's diversity in nature everywhere. If you look at the diversity in the animal world, it's unbelievable, the diversity in God's symbolic creation. If you look at the diversity among plants, I took my granddaughter to a museum in Chicago in the summer. Some of the animals and plants we saw were unbelievable, how much diversity there is in the symbolic expression of God's nature in creation. Human beings are no different. And when God creates that diversity, He doesn't isolate species and plants all by themselves. He puts them together in gardens and forests so that together they become a beautiful symphony of His love and His beauty and His creation. That's what humanity is intended to be. We're not meant to be isolated in tribes. Within each tribe, this is Father's words. I wish I could have dug them up for this sermon, but I couldn't. But Father told us that each tribe is a special expression of one aspect of God's character. Father explained to us that the Asians express God's will, the Africans express God's heart, and the Europeans express God's intellect. Apparently, he also has said that Asians are the Adam culture, Africans are the Eve culture, Europeans are the archangelic culture. These attributes show that tribes are different from one another. This is not a matter of inferiority or superiority. It's a matter that, as within all things in God's creations, they're created differently, diverse, but they're designed to complement one another, right? That's the nature of subject and object, give and take. All the things in creation work as in a harmonious system in complementary relationships, and tribes have complementary attributes, not superior and inferior or any other dialectic that may be chosen. And tribes definitely benefit one another from interaction, from living together and loving and creating together. We know that Father said over and over again that the East, the Asian culture, and the West, the European culture, complement each other and need each other. Father, that was a key part of Father's reason for creating this international movement, because he knew that just an Asian movement was not the answer. And do we think that the intellectual Europeans and the artistic Africans need one another? Absolutely, we need one another. You just think about the music that has come out of the unity between Africans and Europeans in this country. The fusion of African and European music has created the most popular music in the world. You know, if you listen to interviews with the Beatles and ask them where did their original inspiration come from, you know what their answer is? Chuck Berry. Chuck Berry was an African-American rock and roller. He was unbelievably creative. He was the first guy to play guitar and sing and write songs like he did. And it's Chuck Berry's music that they put in the Voyager, and sent out into outer space. That's the fusion of Africans here in America. We need each other. We benefit from each other. On the other hand, without each other, we're so limited, in my opinion, so uninteresting, just as isolated tribes, so one-dimensional without each other. We can see the natural desire to go beyond the tribal level by observing how much Africans, Asians, and Americans all borrow from each other and imitate each other in fashion, in language, in food, in music. There's a natural desire to go beyond tribe. And this fusion of tribal characteristics brings us a fuller expression of God's character, a fuller resemblance to God, much fuller than the expression of tribes and races and peoples in isolation. I remember my wife, when we were first blessed together, whenever she got down and upset, negative, whatever, she would say, "Jim, I want to go back to Japan. I'm going back to Japan." So finally she went back to Japan. She was there for 3 months. This is not meant to be a criticism of Japan, but she came back and said she never talked about going back to Japan again after being there for 3 months. Because there's not the fusion, the cultural fusion in Japan. I love going to Japan, right? It's my favorite country. But I hope that doesn't sound like a criticism of Japan. It's just that by blending East and West together, we get a hybrid that's the best of both tribes. Whether it's African European, Asian European, whatever. They're all, and this is the fusion of these characteristics that brings a fuller expression of God is exactly why Father, from as far back as I can remember, promoted international, intercultural, interracial blessings, because Father understood this clearly, more than anyone in history has understood it. He wanted to create that right at the family level, that fusion. That's what I have in my family. My family is a cultural fusion of Asian and European. It is not easy, however, to transcend our tribal instincts. Tribes have great animosity towards one another because of wars and oppression, injustice, slavery. We are primarily spiritual beings, and we carry our history with us because it's our inheritance. It comes to us through our ancestry, and it influences us. It affects our personality, it affects our perceptions, and we need to be aware of that inheritance in the way that we react to one another. So when I'm dealing on this issue with our African American brothers, we have a motto. It's that when things don't go quite right, we just say, it's not personal, it's providential. And that allows us to go beyond these biases and these tensions that are so natural, absolutely normal. But that's time that we go beyond those, because those aren't personal feelings. Those come from my ancestry. I love God, you love God, we love America, we love true parents. We can go beyond those tribal responses. Some might say, well, I don't really have to do anything particular about dealing with my tribalism because I'm going to overcome my sense to be tribally biased just by overcoming my fallen nature. Eventually, as I remove my fallen nature, I'll gradually learn to see everyone from God's viewpoint. That is not what Father taught us. Father taught us the exact opposite of that. I know I spent a ton of time with Father. Father taught us the opposite. He said, the best way for you to learn to see from God's viewpoint and to overcome your fallen nature is to experience the heart of people who are different from you. To love those people and to serve those people who are different than you. That's how Father taught us to overcome our biases and our fallen nature. So this is exactly what happened to me. I was a naive 20 22-year-old, 21-year-old, and I was shipped off to Japan in the first global team, which I'm very proud of, and I spent 1 year in Asia. Most of that time we were in Japan. I spent most of 1975 in Japan, sleeping on the floor of bowling alleys in a sleeping bag. And I worked closely and made relationships with Japanese people throughout that year. And I had witnessed like crazy and worked on these campaigns and these tours, and I experienced their culture. And I studied their history when I was there. And it delighted me. It was delightful. I became enchanted by Japan, the Japanese people. I found so many beautiful, godly things about Japan that could not be found in the European culture and tribe. It was just a hugely important year for me. It changed my life. And that's why I decided I wanted a Japanese wife. I could see that there's something beyond the European American mindset, and it was very appealing to me. And believe me, my parents and my siblings were shocked and completely unaccepting when I told them I was going to marry outside our tribe. Hey, Mom, guess what? I've been matched to Kinuyo Iwamoto. Aren't you excited? No, I'm not excited. But then pretty quickly my parents became enchanted with Kinuyo just the way I'd become enchanted with Japan. And a generation later, not one of our 4 children has chosen a European to be married to. Not one. That's not what happened in our family. Their choices show that they too see the beauty and the fullness in the fusion of our tribes. In the case of my family, it's the fusion of Asian and European tribes together. They did not want to leave and marry, Western American culture. That didn't have an appeal to them. The principle explains that our individual fallen nature, our inability to see from God's viewpoint, is the root cause of our bias and our discrimination. So tribal bias and its derivative, tribalism, or racial bias and its derivative, racism, they have their root within our fallen nature. We have inherited this in our fallen nature as individuals. Our community has inherited it in our way of thinking and acting. Our nation and the world has this within it, these biases. The principal understanding is that peace starts with me. If you read Father's peace messages, that's what they tell us. Peace, this is a problem, this is my problem. I take ownership of it. It's not the problem of some rotten features of this country. It's not the problem of something that's fundamentally wrong with the other tribe. It's my problem. That's the principled understanding that we learn. If you study the peace messages, that's what you're going to read there, that I have to overcome my fallen nature and the way I treat and love other people. So, unificationists can be very proud, in my opinion, that we have basically at the individual level, we've made most of us, very good progress in dealing with this issue. But we still have a long way to go. I would say some people have made profound progress on this issue. But unificationists, I think, are very special in their awareness of the need to go beyond their own race, their own tribe. And we've lived that way. But we have a long way to go. When I can overcome it, then I can contribute to my church overcoming it. I can help this church deal with that issue if I can figure out a way for myself to overcome it. And this church, if it deals with it, can help other churches and other communities figure out how to sincerely transcend tribalism in the way we think and the way we live. And if a community and churches can become successful in overcoming these instincts, then we can help our country, our nation, get beyond tribalism. And there's no question in my mind that if this country, America, learns successfully in this new era, the post-George Floyd era, how to finally go to the next level, cross the next threshold, and transcend tribalism, then that will be the solution that the world is waiting for. We can, as the elder son nation, can help other countries, but other countries are not going to figure this out until we ourselves are successful. Now that part of it's pretty much my opinion, but Father did explain that more or less when he described America as being the elder son nation. So Father has, and by the way, that is God's hope for America. That's what Father, if you go back and read Father's great speech, God's hope for America, this is the role that Father sees for America in the world. We transform our racial bias within ourselves, first of all, by changing our intellect through education, by changing our character through experiencing, communicating, bonding, healing, reconciling with people of other races. That changes our character, but first we have to understand why. That's principled education. That's why I'm doing this sermon. And second step is character education, experience, and third is heartistic transformation, where we change our fallen nature by forming personal relationships of heart, of love and heart with other people. So I'd like to conclude just by saying, from the principal perspective, why do we want to do this? The desired endpoint of dealing with the problem of racism and tribalism in our country, which is reached a point of absolute urgency, is not just to bring more justice to suffering people in our country. That's not our ultimate endpoint, our motivation. It's not to help just make it better for African Americans or Asian Americans. It's not even to make America a better country. It's not to find the solutions to the tribal problems in this country. Harmonious, fully integrated tribal relations are an elementary requirement for building God's kingdom of heaven on earth. The vision of building God's kingdom on earth, which is explicitly what this movement is trying to do. That's exactly what we're all about, right? We are serious about building Chunilguk, right? Unificationists believe that the kingdom is already unfolding. You can't take that seriously and not be concerned with the resolution of this problem. It's essential requirement for building Chunilguk. The kingdom of heaven is understood to be one harmonious human family under God. And right now it's divided into tribes. And the tribes are suffering from tribalism. You can't speak of building the kingdom of God without taking personal responsibility to resolve and restore this tragic and chronic and lingering problem within God's family. Adieu. Thank you.